I am 63. Yesterday morning, I stood in my driveway in Scottsdale watching a two-man HVAC crew pull the main air conditioning unit off the side of my house. The system had been running nonstop for a week, making a loud grinding noise, but the house was still warm. I assumed the compressor was shot, and I was going to have to write a massive check to replace the entire engine. The older technician did not even look at the motor. He unbolted the side panel, reached into the intake housing, and pulled out a filter that was completely caked in a thick, solid layer of desert dust and pet hair. It looked like a piece of gray felt. He tossed it on the grass and told me the motor was perfectly fine. The system was just suffocating. It was burning itself out, trying to pull air through a wall of resistance. Watching that heavy machine struggle and grind simply because it could not pull in what it needed to function reminded me of exactly how I felt about 10 years ago. For a massive portion of my life, I treated my own internal energy like an infinite resource. I spent decades working as a corporate sales executive, jumping between time zones, sleeping in hotels, and living on a diet of adrenaline and black coffee. My entire operating system was built on the belief that if you just push the engine hard enough, it will produce the power you need. I never thought about what was happening to the internal mechanics. I assumed that as long as I kept forcing myself to perform, my biology would simply obey the command. But biology does not work on willpower. It works on cellular infrastructure. And when you suffocate that infrastructure for long enough, the machine stops pulling its weight. When I crossed into my mid-50s, the baseline power I used to rely on just evaporated. It was not a sudden illness or a dramatic collapse. It was a slow, heavy draining of my daily vitality. I would wake up at 6 in the morning already feeling like I had been working for 5 hours. By 3 in the afternoon, I felt a physical weight settling into my shoulders. My focus would drift. My physical response, the natural, unforced strength that a man relies on to feel capable in his own skin, became sluggish and unpredictable. I felt like that grinding AC unit. The motor was still there, but the output was completely gone. When you lose your physical vitality, you do not just lose energy. You lose your presence. You lose the ability to stand in a room and feel like you actually occupy the space. I handled that loss the way a lot of men handle it. I covered it up with excuses and avoidance. I started sitting in my car in the driveway for 10 or 15 minutes after I got home from work, just staring at the steering wheel, trying to summon the energy to walk through the front door and pretend I was fine. I started pulling away from the woman I was married to at the time. I would find reasons to go to bed early, or I would stay up late watching documentaries I did not care about, just to avoid the silent pressure of the bedroom. I did not want to initiate anything because I knew the machinery was too exhausted to follow through. The distance that kind of exhaustion creates in a house is toxic. It is a quiet, heavy resentment that builds up when a man refuses to admit he is running on empty. You do not talk about it because admitting that you are completely drained feels like admitting defeat. You think you are protecting your pride, but you are actually just burning down your own house. The divorce that eventually happened in my 50s was rooted in many things, but that absolute physical and emotional exhaustion, that refusal to stop pretending and actually look at the engine, was the core of the failure. Living alone in an apartment a few years later, I finally got tired of waking up exhausted. I realized I could not spend the last third of my life feeling like a battery that refused to hold a charge. I refused to go down the path of prescription stimulants or heavy chemical energy drinks. I knew how those things worked. They do not give you actual energy. They just force your adrenal glands to panic, which redlines an already exhausted engine and leaves you even more depleted the next day. I did not want to whip a tired horse. I wanted to rebuild the cellular battery itself. I started doing my own reading. I looked past the mainstream fitness advice and started digging into how the male body actually produces sustainable power at a cellular level. I read about how the mitochondria, the tiny engines inside our cells, start to suffocate as we age because of stress, poor diet, and restricted blood flow. That was when I found out about raw cacao. Not the processed, sugar-loaded chocolate you buy at the grocery store. I am talking about the raw, bitter, unheated seed. I read that it was one of the most dense sources of flavonols and magnesium on the planet. It was essentially raw material for cellular energy and vascular repair. It was supposed to open up the blood vessels and feed the system directly. So I bought a bag of pure raw cacao powder. It tasted like dirt, but I forced myself to drink a mug of it mixed with hot water every morning for almost 2 months. I waited for the fog to lift. I waited for the energy to return. Nothing changed. The heavy feeling in my chest was still there. The afternoon crash was still there. The lack of physical drive was completely unchanged. I was incredibly frustrated. I felt like I was doing the right thing, feeding the system the highest quality raw material I could find, but the engine was still suffocating. It took me another few weeks of research to understand why the cacao was not working. What I discovered completely changed my perspective on how the older male body absorbs nutrients. I learned that raw cacao is an incredibly heavy, dense compound. In a younger man, the digestive system and the blood vessels are efficient enough to break it down and distribute it. But in a man over 50, a man whose vascular system has been tightened and constricted by decades of stress, the microscopic capillaries are physically closed off. I was drinking the raw material, but my restricted blood vessels were acting exactly like that clogged filter on my AC unit. The heavy nutrients could not penetrate the cellular walls. They were just passing right through my system. I needed a catalyst. I needed something to forcefully open the capillaries, a thermal activator that could create enough heat and expansion in the blood vessels to let the cacao actually enter the bloodstream. I found the answer in an old mechanism that endurance workers used to use to survive extreme cold and fatigue. They used a specific compound that causes immediate, mild vasodilation. It acts like a chemical wedge, slightly opening the microscopic doors in the vascular system so that heavier nutrients can rush in. It was cayenne pepper, a standard, ordinary spice sitting right in my kitchen cabinet. The capsaicin in the pepper generates immediate thermal heat in the body. That heat signals the blood vessels to dilate and expand. When you combine that expansion with a dense nutrient like raw cacao, you completely change the absorption rate. The cayenne opens the door, and the cacao walks right in to feed the cells. I decided to test the mechanics on myself. The next morning, I boiled some water. I put a large spoonful of the bitter, raw cacao powder into my mug. But this time, I took a tiny pinch of cayenne pepper, just enough to fit on the tip of a knife, and dropped it into the powder. I poured the hot water over it, stirred it up, and drank it down. It had a slight burn at the back of my throat. It woke up my senses, but I did not feel a massive, jittery rush. This is a structural repair, not a caffeine high. I kept the routine. Every single morning, right after I woke up, hot water, raw cacao, 1 pinch of cayenne pepper, swallow, start the day. About 2 weeks into this new routine, I was out in the garage trying to organize some heavy boxes of old files. Usually physical labor like that would make me feel hollow and drained within 20 minutes. I would have to go sit down and catch my breath. An hour went by and I was still moving boxes. My breathing was steady. The deep, heavy fatigue in my muscles was simply not there. The catalyst was working. The lines were opening up, and the cellular engines were finally getting the raw material they needed to hold a charge. And then, a few weeks later, the most significant change occurred. I woke up on a Tuesday, hours before I needed to be anywhere, and I felt a physical surge that I had not experienced in years. The baseline physical response, the unforced natural drive that tells a man his internal wiring is fully operational, was back online. It was not a weak signal. It was strong, reliable, and undeniable. I sat there on the edge of my bed and I felt a sudden, sharp wave of regret. I regretted all those years I spent sitting in my car, avoiding my own house, and quietly accepting my physical decline. I regretted letting my confidence erode to nothing simply because I did not understand that my internal engine was just suffocating behind closed doors. I had lost years of connection because I did not know how to open the capillaries. But that regret washed away and left behind a massive sense of relief because I finally knew I was not permanently broken. The power was still in the engine. It just needed to breathe. My reality today is completely different. I am married to Alyssa now. She is a woman who reads people instantly, and she expects me to be physically and emotionally present. When you have a partner who actually pays attention to you, you cannot hide behind a wall of exhaustion. You have to have the bandwidth to engage. And when your body actually produces the energy you ask of it, the quiet anxiety in the back of your mind disappears. You stop calculating how many hours of the day you have left before you crash. You stop worrying about whether you will have the drive for intimacy. You just live your life with a quiet, steady confidence. I still drink that exact same mix every single morning. A mug of hot water, raw cacao, and a pinch of cayenne pepper. I drink it before I do anything else. I do it because I understand the mechanics of my own body now. The cacao provides the power, and the cayenne keeps the lines wide open to receive it. I am not suggesting that a mug of hot water is going to erase a lifetime of neglect. If you are drinking alcohol every night, staring at a screen until 2 in the morning, and carrying around a massive amount of unmanaged stress, a pinch of pepper is not going to save you. You still have to do the physical work. You still have to move your body, manage your sleep, and act like a man who cares about his own survival. But I am telling you this. Many of you are walking through your days right now feeling like a shadow of yourselves. You are sitting at your desk staring at the wall, wondering where your drive went. You are avoiding the person you love because you simply do not have the internal bandwidth to be a capable partner in the dark. You think this exhaustion is just what getting older feels like? You are probably not as worn out as you think you are. You might just be starving a perfectly good engine. You do not have to accept the heavy shoulders and the lack of physical response. If you have crossed into your 50s, understanding how to feed and open your own internal pathways is not optional. It is your primary responsibility. Start looking at the environment you are forcing your body to operate in. Consider what happens when you finally give your cells the raw material they need and the exact thermal catalyst required to actually absorb it. The machinery wants to hold a charge. It wants to give you power. Sometimes you just have to remove the resistance, force the lines open, and let the vitality return to where it was always meant to be.